Best bit of a Wednesday night is this, man, the great Mark Latham, just a couple of weeks away from that New South Wales election, and he is powering on. Poll after poll after poll says that they are surging, and it's because, well, obviously his appearances on this show, but more importantly, what he actually says on this show and outside of the Parliament. It's all your hard work.
Great to see you, Paul. I'm fresh from the hustings in Hornsby, and what a story to tell.
So, a week ago, it was just a quick little check-in on what's happening up there. A week later, you've got a candidate, and you've got people ready to pounce on Matt Kean.
Well, they know he's an imposter. This guy deceived them 4 years ago. He said he was a mainstream Liberal. He's out there now with the Greens, the far woke left of politics, and the locals there today in the Hornsby Mall. You know, a few old-time Labor people giving me a razz, that's fair enough. But overwhelmingly, no one defending Matt Kean, and the feeling that this guy has drifted off to the left and he doesn't represent those mainstream, conservative, common-sense values in Hornsby. And our One Nation candidate, Steve Bush, is a cracker. 30 years a Qantas pilot, intelligent guy, right there in the Hornsby set of values, a conservative, and that's what they need. So I think the imposter Matt Kean is in for the fight of his life.
Now, I don't know who this person is. I don't know everything they've ever written on the internet or said in public. Who cares, right? But a bloke in a T-shirt today.
He's not Matt Kean.
No, I'm not talking about your candidate.
Oh, okay. This guy in the T-shirt. Oh, he captured the vibe.
Yeah, have a look at this, right? Which is, what is he saying there? Where he goes, treat him keen.
No, treat him mean.
Yep.
You've got to vote out Green Matt Kean.
I love it. Well played.
So that's the way to go, isn't it? And he's just walking around. We ran into him, and I think we're going to make 1,000 of those T-shirts, and they'll sell like hotcakes.
Mate, there'll be one on the set. It'll be hanging right over that for the entire campaign if you want.
That's when you've arrived in Australian politics. You get on the set of the man cave.
That's when they know. That's when they know. Now, overall policy stuff, though, let's talk about your school's policy, which is out now. You want to make facts-based and results-based things mandatory. Give me an idea about what that means.
Well, it's hard to believe the New South Wales government doesn't require any classroom to teach according to the evidence. We know what works and what doesn't work in the classroom. All the school education's been studied inside out right around the world hundreds of times. So if we know the evidence of what works, that direct instruction goes better than so-called student-centred learning and teachers as facilitators, that phonics literacy goes better than whole word, that behavioural standards go better than chaos, that testing and data assessment of students goes better than just the stab in the dark. So if we know these things, why doesn't the New South Wales government require every teacher, every classroom, every school to teach to the evidence? That's how you lift student academic results. And the tragedy in our state is that that galah, Adrian Piccoli, if you remember him 10 years ago as the National Party Education Minister, said local schools, local decisions, which basically meant go and do whatever you like in the classroom. And that was the policy of the O'Farrell government, and they haven't really changed it ever since. And it was the worst possible time, Paul, because it was the time 10 years ago when the left-wing teaching fads were becoming popular, all the rubbish programs, the woke stuff in the classroom was starting to infiltrate school education. So at the worst possible time, this government said, just do whatever you like. I want to bring them back to the evidence base, and more than that, to bring the school inspectors back in so that twice a year the parents would get a certification your child in your government school is being taught according to the evidence. Direct instruction, phonics literacy, behavioural standards, data, testing, and if the teacher's falling behind, the inspector would act as a mentor to say, look, this is how we do things according to the evidence, this is where you've got to head, and also a certification that the good stuff in the curriculum is being taught instead of political indoctrination. So that should happen twice a year, and parents are hungry, I can assure you, to know what's happening in the classroom. Are my kids being taught according to the evidence and the best practice? And I think that's where we need to head.
How do you make sure that the bureaucracy in and around education doesn't slow play the ball? If you get into a position where this is the line in the sand to get something through the upper house and it becomes the law in New South Wales, becomes the system in New South Wales, how do we make sure that it actually gets implemented rather than, we're just a pilot program in Wollongong for 2 years?
Well, the tragedy is that New South Wales has the fastest falling school academic results in the world, not just Australia, in the world. And surely it's time for the government to take control. I mean, who runs education policy? I don't see any of the bureaucrats. Their name won't be on the ballot paper on the 25th of March. The government has got to run education policy, and I just think it's policy 101 to say these 5 things work in the classroom. They're compulsory. They're not optional. If they work, if they're evidence-based, if they're supported by studies all over the world, if we know they add a lot of value to the education of students, surely they've got to be mandatory, and we have the inspectors in there to make sure it's actually happening in the classroom.
But also, as we all saw for 2 years, that for some reason the state wants to forget. The state can tell you if you can leave your house, what time you can go on the street. The state, when it wants to use power, can get down to fining the individual for what they do. The idea that Perrottet this week's out there saying, oh, well, look, I'm kind of powerless about vaccine mandates, but the government can put through legislation that's legalised euthanasia. I'm fine, I support that policy. But it's just, it waxes and wanes. You are the people that we send to the parliament to be the guardians of the system, to be the leaders of the system. Otherwise, we just have a permanent bureaucratic state. And that's not what any person wants, apart from the bureaucratic state.
Well, this is a government that locked people in their homes for months on end, a complete overreaction looking back on it. We now find out that the vaccination program is not stopping transmission of COVID, but Perrottet says that he's powerless to do something about the mandates for police and emergency services. Well, you know, he's in office but not in power, and more so, is this really a government that says, look, we really can't do much about classroom teaching and say there are 5 evidence-based important things that work, that are known to work, and we can't make them mandatory? I mean, why run for office? Well, you'd have to say to Perrottet, mate, if you can't run the state, and most particularly run high value-added programs in our classrooms, you're better off, you know, going to play tiddlywinks.
Well, there are 2 types of politicians. Ones that want to cut the ribbon on a school, and one that wants to actually focus on what happens inside the school the day after and every day later. You're of that ladder that wants to focus on what happens inside the school once it's open, once it's been renovated, once it's got its new, and that's why...
Well, that's the focus. Classroom practice is the key. You can build a lot of schools, you can cut a lot of ribbons, but unless you've got high quality teaching methods in the classroom, those kids are falling behind. Disadvantaged kids stay disadvantaged, and that's the tragedy of where we've been ever since Piccoli did local schools, local decisions. So you can change that overnight, and it's time for the government to run education policy.
Even bigger than education is energy in New South Wales, because it literally is every single tentacle, everywhere there's a PowerPoint. We know that Araring is about to disappear, Liddell's going to disappear, and as I showed on the program last night, super hot day, everyone uses their aircon, turns on a fan. Guess where 70% of the power came from? The very places they're about to shut down. And the energy market operator has turned around and said there's not enough to replace what we're about to turn off. This will all happen on the footsteps of the next government, but you have a chance in a couple of weeks, if you care, not just to send a message, but to change course, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And the best thing we could do is abandon the transition to so-called clean energy economy. That would help to keep Araring operating. It would help to keep the lights on and bring down the electricity prices. Because the truth is, Matt Kean thinks he can save the planet, with New South Wales having 0.4% of global carbon emissions. The truth is we've got to save the electricity grid from Matt Kean.
Correct.
That's what it's about. And Chris Minns earlier this week was in a muddle as to what he would do. He's talking about renationalising Araring Power Station. Minns and the Labor Party voted 85 times in the New South Wales Upper House to support Matt Kean and the mad rush to 100% renewables within 10 years. And I gave umpteen speeches on this. They looked at me like I had 2 heads, but how does it look a couple of years later? I said 2 things are going to happen. You will force out the coal-fired power stations early, and that's happened with Araring, and you will not have the backup power that's needed, the gas peaking plants, the pumped hydro in place to keep the lights on for when your solar farms are not working and your wind farms, the wind's not blowing. So those things unfortunately have come to pass. AEMO says we're going to have blackouts in New South Wales. It is time now, and it's 5 minutes to midnight, to change course, to build an extra gas peaking plant, to forget about Kean's green energy dreams, his electricity tax, bring down the prices, take the ban off nuclear. We should be a global energy superpower with flourishing coal, gas, nuclear and renewables. instead of putting all our eggs in the renewables basket. Paul, it is insanity, but for goodness sake, on the 25th of March, people have got to vote for practical, common sense energy policies.
I smile because there is nothing more I love than you in full flight, and you are in full flight, you're over the target and you're ready to go.
Well, we're bombing away.
Go hard. Thank you, mate. All the best. Treat them mean, get rid of Matt Kean and the rest of them. You can do that by voting for One Nation, especially Mark in the upper house.